Good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Thought Leaders Lecture Series, presented by Space Center Houston and proudly sponsored by UTMB Health. I am Christine Wade, Vice President of Surgical and Procedural Areas for UTMB Health. Tonight, we examine the principles of teamwork and leadership in a thoughtful discussion between William Harris, Space Center Houston President and CEO, and Eugene Kranz, NASA's second Chief Flight Director and one of the organization's most esteemed leaders. Eugene will recount lessons in teamwork and leadership learned during his years in mission control and detailed in his latest book, Tough and Competent. As an ER and trauma nurse with many years of experience, I can speak firsthand to the importance of teamwork and leadership in stressful life or death situations. Today, across UTMB Health, including our operating room suites, emergency rooms, and Level 1 Trauma Center, we've assembled talented teams that bring their skills together, focused on great patient outcomes and experiences. I am proud of our teams and look forward to hearing how our tactics and practices align with those that made Apollo 11 and 13 missions successful. While it's a long way from a UTMB surgical suite to an orbit around the moon, Mr. Kranz's theme for the evening is one that holds lessons for us all. I'm glad you've joined us for this insightful talk. I look forward to Eugene Kranz's words of wisdom and know you'll enjoy some of his recollections.
Good evening. I'm so delighted to welcome all of you here this evening. My name is William Harris. I'm President and CEO here at Space Center Houston, and we're delighted to have all of our fellow guests, space enthusiasts, here at Space Center Houston. I want to let you all know, because we're a sold-out evening, thanks to Fox 26, this evening is also being live streamed. So we are online, so others can tune in to experience this extraordinary evening. In this hallowed space, where dreams of humanity reach to the stars are nurtured and celebrated, we're truly privileged to be joined by a man whose determined spirit and visionary leadership have propelled us to realms beyond imagination. As we embark on this momentous occasion, we're reminded of the profound impact that Eugene Kranz's unwavering dedication has left in the chronicle of space exploration. With Apollo 11, Apollo 13, and the other Apollo missions etched into the fabric of history, his remarkable contributions have not only guided spacecrafts through the void of space, but also lit the path for generations of dreamers and doers. Today, as we stand on the shoulders of giants like Eugene Kranz, we acknowledge the extraordinary challenges faced during these harrowing hours in the depths of space. With grit, determination, and an unyielding belief in the human spirit, Eugene and his team at Mission Control exemplified the very essence of ingenuity in the face of adversity. His contributions not only shape the course of history, but continue to resonate within the hearts of those who yearn to explore the cosmos and push the limits of human potential. As we embark on this journey of celebration and reflection, we extend our sincerest gratitude to Eugene Kranz for gracing us with his presence today. Let us join hands in honoring a man whose legacy will forever illuminate the path to the stars. Thank you, Eugene. So a little bit about the format of this evening. We're going to, in a moment, hear a few words from Mr. Kranz. But before that, I want to remind all of you that we are going to allow some of you to ask questions. So on the screen behind me, you're going to see a QR code that you can scan with your digital device. Please have it on silent or on vibrate so we don't disturb the program. And I have actually a device here where I'm going to be able to see those questions. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll try to get to as many as we can during the course of the evening. Also, a safety announcement. Space Center Houston has 2 emergency exits in the event we have to evacuate, one on either side of the screen that will take you directly out into the parking lot. So hopefully that will not be necessary in the course of this evening, especially with the very cherished rain that we're now having. So without further delay, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Eugene Kranz.
Thank you very much. You know, before I got up here, I asked some of the people that were working here whether it's William or whether it's Mr. Harris. And for the many years that we've worked together, I've always addressed him as Mr. Harris, because that's just the way I was brought up. But it was very interesting. It'll take a different twist on this today, because William basically is responsible for the restoration of mission control. And I had an interesting experience today.
Well, thank you.
We had a group of about 10 people in mission control, and for a change, I sat in back and watched the people taking photographs, looking, moving around right on down the line. So I had an entirely different perspective of what this place does to the average visitor that is coming in, and the message that sends, this is what space was, and this is what space can be again. So it was an interesting twist, just sitting in the back and watching this. I want to offer thanks to Space Center Houston, Kimberly and Haley, and give them many thanks for setting up this evening's program. You know, I've never been an event coordinator, but I'm learning a lot by self-publishing a book. And I have been an event coordinator. I almost wanted to panic when my computer went out for 2 days. But it's interesting to address this book that we've written, and I'd say it's we've written, because this was an effort basically that goes back into the final years of the Apollo program. And fortunately, I don't know why I accepted this challenge, but I went around and interviewed Chris Kraft and Sig Schober and John Hodge and got their twist on what they had done. I now had the chance, because my notes sat in the office for about 20 years. And now I sit back and 20 years later look back at what they said and what they did and how they did it. You know, I've got many important people with me, or for me tonight. My primary one is my wife, Marta. And for more than 66 years, she provided the inspiration and the support. She even tolerated me building an airplane in the garage where you had to go through the front door. You couldn't go through the garage to get to the kitchen anymore. But as a mother of 6, she had many skills, among them sewing. And that was basic. And she was the spiritual leader behind establishing the vests in mission control. Because back when she was a young wife of a fighter pilot, we were down at Myrtle Beach. And the two of us, you always get on the duties as assigned. We're established to take the doors for the ready room we had and paint the mission logo. We'd never done this before. Paint the logo there. And we sat and worked for several days painting our squadron emblem there. But she made the white vests, and believe we made over 40. I think she's sitting back up in the top somewhere. Yeah, and the kids, you know, having a bunch of girls in the family, that's always good. They said, hey, we ought to have a flower that we give Marta up there. So that was the case. We have 6 children: Carmen, Lucy, Joan, Mark, Bridget, and Jean. And they are basically our treasures. We're fortunate, we're united, and we have one strong family. There are several guests here this evening. I have Dr. Ricky Hannigan. He was our next door neighbor. And basically his father, he represents his father here tonight, was the boss of the Lunar Systems branch champ. So he was the guy that made it happen down in the working ranks of the organization that produced the mission controllers. Got several other ones in here, which I'd like to identify. And by the way, I use notes. And if you time me, I try to keep it 8 minutes or less. Where's my Australian, my pilot, Richard? There we go. Why don't you stand up? You know, I selected him to write the introduction to the book because I read his book. I read his book on Qantas Flight 32. And it was interesting to see the teamwork in that crew. This is the world's largest transport aircraft. The performance of that crew after an engine exploded, punched holes in the wings, you lost the majority of your flight systems in there, you're severely overweight, you got weight and balance problems in there, and yet he managed to get that aircraft down to a safe landing. And not only did it get down, but he kept the people in the aircraft for 2 hours because the brakes were white hot, fuel was leaking from the wings, etc. So basically, he provided the inspiration for writing part of this book. I also have Colonel Mitch Utterback. He's Special Forces. We've been together since 9/11. He's basically supported multiple missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. And tomorrow he is basically leading an aggressor force to train the next generation of Green Berets in the woods and forests of North Carolina. I have Captain John Dudley. Where is he? There's. Okay. John Dudley, Captain John Dudley, American Airlines Operations. And basically, he's got an interesting role because he's addressing leadership of a major international airline and the challenges that he faced. But there's an interesting relationship there because he is in the same job, in the same office that my jet flight instructor, Wendell Dobbs, was. There's one coincidence, got a couple more in there. Joe Panza, where's Joe? Joe has been my military escort for many missions, but he flew combat search and rescue. And if you look in the history books, Lima Site 85 was the largest single ground combat loss of Air Force personnel in the Vietnam War. And he is one of the pilots who picks 6 survivors out of it, one of whom became a Medal of Honor winner, and he was killed while in the helicopter. I got Fred Hayes, who's a Marine aviator. Where's Fredo? Well, there he is, okay. And we were debating whether he ought to show up in a flight suit tonight, but he decided to be appropriate down here and put on a jacket instead of the flight suit. But basically, he flew the Apollo 13, everybody knows that, but he also flew 3 approach and landing test missions. And his book, Never Panic Early, is very interesting reading. And it really is a story of destiny. Well, you could start reading that book as you went through chapter. You knew he would become an astronaut. Dutch von Ehrenfried down in the front seat right here was my first NASA hire. My first NASA hire. And probably his most critical mission was when I sent him to Houston to find accommodations and houses that we could buy cheap for about 15 controllers. And he is basically the forerunner of what became known as Flight Controller Alley. Okay. Ed Fendel is right here. And basically, if you're ever a pilot deep in a deep weather problem, he's a GCA controller, and GCA controller becomes your best friend, and you leave a bottle of good whiskey at the officers' club. So Ed was a GCA controller, and it was interesting. He worked with me on the Ed White mission, went over to Carnarvon, and basically he stepped into an incredible responsibility. We had the communications problems in the Gemini 9 mission. We had to reboot the entire operations support for communications and mission control between Apollo 9 and Apollo 11. He's the guy who got it. I got Jan. Jan Wade is is the first mission control secretary we've worked. We have worked together for almost 50 years, and she suffered through the many revisions of this book. And the final notes to talk to Chris Hadfield. Basically, he provided the quote. I always look for a quote to establish the theme of the overall book. And I like this, where he talked about leadership. Part of the responsibility of leadership is to train the people and then step back and let them shine. And I think that's a great way to describe one of the critical elements in leadership. So anyway, I think that's it. Do you have some questions here you're going to...
I do. Thank you so much. Well, Gene, I wanted to start our conversation with a question about your first book, which was Failure is Not an Option, that you published many years ago. And that really focused on the early space missions through Apollo. Why did you start writing Tough and Competent? What kind of led you to this current book?
You know, for many years, Chris Kraft and the people in mission control really tried to debate what mission control was. Chris basically considered it a cathedral for a long period of time. I considered it a laboratory where we built the next generation of people. But I'm a reader, and I like the writings of Theodore Roosevelt. And the opening theme of the book comes from Roosevelt's speech, which is called The Citizenship in a Republic. It's known as the Man in the Arena speech. And it begins with, "It is not the critic who counts, nor the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena." And I considered mission control the arena of spaceflight, where we take young controllers, they trained as engineers right on down the line. They have to step up to incredible accountability. Spaceflight, I think, is the most unforgiving of human endeavors. And those who enter, whether they be astronauts, program managers, controllers, or staff, enter a world of absolute accountability. It's go or no go. There's no shades of gray in there. And mission control is the arena manned spaceflight, and that basically got me writing this next book.
So also, Tough and Competent is known as the Kranz dictum. And often you're quoted as saying that. Why did you select this title?
Pardon? Why did I choose the title? This is interesting. If you start to write a book, you got to figure out, what is this book about? Who is it for? And what is the central theme we got? You know, it's Tough and Competent is called the dictum, the Kranz dictum. And if you can go into various corporate businesses, offices, basically emergency rooms, and you can find these words of the dictum, it talks about accountability, and it talks about your responsibilities as individuals to perform. And I think it fits the arena of manned spaceflight. The accountability necessary to walk into that room that you established, we established, and perform duties that are not gray, they're black and white. Sitting in mission control today, I wish I had brought this up. We had one controller who was really tested in the Apollo 11 landing. That was Steve Bales. It was his 27th birthday that day. Interesting thing to remember, your birthday. Go ahead.
Oh, very interesting. Well, actually, that leads me to another question, the subtitle in the book, which is Leadership and Team Chemistry. And you don't often hear reference to team chemistry in a book title or in reference to leadership. And I'm curious why you decided to include that, and what does that mean to you?
Well, it was basically, there was much new material that we put in the book. Part of it comes back on Apollo 11, the first book I wrote about Apollo 11, but I did a speech up at the Smithsonian for Flight Jacket Night. And in preparation for that speech, I basically took Neil Armstrong's debriefing. Personally, I went through all the flight records I had in there. I took my logs, I put all this thing together, and I came to some basically recognition of the impact these program alarms had on Neil as an aviator. Up on the way, he should have been looking through his landing point designator and looking at his landing site he was going to. But basically, he continued, like every good pilot does, to fly the airplane. And then I think back to the accident he had out at Ellington Field where the LLTV that he was flying crashed. And basically, he ejected horizontally, and he had one swing in the parachute before he hit the ground. And I think Neil basically had that in mind. He would get this down to the surface of the moon, but if need be, he'd fly it all the way. And that was one of the key things. There's also several other things. I felt that we had basically ignored the Skylab program. So basically, I got together with Joe Kerwin, and we talked over Skylab, and that was probably the most interesting rescue. We didn't rescue a spacecraft, we rescued a program that day. And then you got Jack Kinsler. It started off by him putting out a purchase request in for 4 of the longest fiberglass fishing poles he could find and 4 large rat trap springs. And he developed the device that basically became the protective garment we needed for the spacecraft. And then you can talk about Joe Kerwin's EVA, and they got a good description of it right here in the museum. They got a recording there. And you want to talk about the spooky stuff, we'd never be allowed to do that, I think, in any program beyond saving Skylab.
Great. Well, I'm curious, what lessons are pertinent to the future work and the challenges of the Moon and Mars that you cover in Tough and Competent? What are some of the lessons that you hope people working on today's programs will take into account?
It's interesting you talk about some of the lessons learned. And I think there's one very strong lesson. The final chapters of the book are pretty grim. It talks about the chaos after the Challenger accident. And it really starts off with saying, you know, at JSC we had 4 center directors in 1 year. We had 3 administrators. And the working level devils basically were trying to find out what is the direction we're intending to go. And I think it's important that, that you look at the past history of programs and say, we should have had a succession criteria, a program. I've talked to the former Johnson Space Center director there and talked about the need to get something going where we train people to rapidly move into new sites within the institution. And that was one. Unfortunately, he left and moved on to SpaceX, I believe. But I think that is something that I think should come across strong with the model, with the business model they have for the Artemis program.
Well, so, Gene, among many things that I admire about you is that you are really a driving force behind inspiring and educating the public about space. What can we do to sustain and increase the public's interest in space exploration?
That's a great question. It's one that has irritated me for years. NASA does not do, the working level devils at NASA do not act to market their programs, to speak for the programs, et cetera. Jan and I, we get, I don't know how many letters, we answer every letter that we receive. And I think that basically the people over at Johnson Space Center, whether it be civil servants or contractors, should become the foot soldiers of space, and they're going to basically sell the program because it's sold in the public, and the public tells the Congress what they want to do. So I think that is one of the greatest challenges that I think that JSC and NASA faces.
Well, I do think that there is something we're experiencing here at Space Center Houston is a lot of passion among youth about space exploration. And we now have entered this period of time when we not only can look at the stars, we can go to them, right? We're beginning to venture into space. And you have been very committed to nurturing and inspiring youth. And in fact, you allowed us to name a scholarship fund in your honor, and we have some of the recipients here this evening. What are some of your words of advice for young people who have an interest in space exploration?
I think that it's interesting. I was very interested. I'm glad we got the Eugene Kranz STEM Junior High in there. I was glad to see the university program that you've got going here. I think young people have very vivid imaginations. Instead of looking at all of these other opportunities and all these social media things, let's find some way to introduce technology into that social media. Let's find some way to introduce basic accountability for these young people. You know, I think the raw material is out there. They're willing, ready to go. You just got to grab them and say, listen, I could go on in this forever.
Well, I'm in your boat. I agree with you.
Yeah.
We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to get through some of these, and I'm going to condense a few of them. There are a series of questions here about should we be sending robots on these missions instead of humans? So what are your thoughts on robotic missions versus human missions, say, to Mars?
That's a good question, but I think it has to be cooperative. If you always look at go back to the earlier programs. We set the satellites up there. We had a better understanding of the moon. We learned about lunar mascons by sending the lunar orbiters around there. Basically, we couldn't have landed on the moon without the benefit of the missions the unmanned missions that preceded it. I think that this is an artificial question. Anybody that wants to go do something is going to have to do some investigation. What do we need to know about it? How are we going to find about it? How much do we need to learn? And then we can build the systems and assign the missions, et cetera. I think it's really a question of collaborative work between the manned systems and the robotic systems.
So there are a number of questions here asking about what ifs, kind of things from the past, and there's one that's interesting here. And the first is, what was your first reaction when you learned about the explosion on Apollo 13?
That's interesting. There's a couple twists in this thing here. Because I had flown fighter aircraft, I had seen aircraft destroyed, violent explosions, loss of crew right on the line. But my first thought was very straightforward. We'd seen several glitches, power-wise, and I said, just another electrical glitch. We'll work the problem after we put the crew to sleep. And they had another controller that says we had a pretty big bang associated with that. And I downloaded a different one because we had a similar problem in the Apollo 9 mission, where basically the undocking and docking, and what was interesting. And then finally we got the call from the crew that basically they see something vetting. So it was moved to the solve it easy, let's find out more about this, and then all of a sudden it was survival. But the beauty of the thing is, in mission control, we were prepared. We had the best crisis management plan, I think, in the entire world. Jim Lovell and I used to go out and talk to various corporate groups, and we would talk the business of corporate management. Once we had that problem, the beauty of the thing was Glenn Lundy was sitting right next to me at the time of the explosion. Within minutes, he was down in the trench coming up with ways to get the thing home. Basically, the controllers were basically about 20 minutes into this whole thing, basically the lunar module was going to be our lifeboat. So we started working that direction. So it was interesting that from my standpoint, I downmoded, went through a series until we got to the survival mode, and then it was crisis management.
So it's always first the crew,
Yeah.
right? Most important.
Well, Fredo here, he can say a few words about it. I won't ask him what he thought.
So there's a question from the audience. I think it's a very interesting one. There is a new direction in exploration with more privatization. And the question really is, what are your thoughts about this, the growth of the private space sector, which has become worldwide?
Yeah, that's a question I can understand. If you've lived as long as I have, 90 years, you can see the advent of all of these technologies, and it was always a question, which way do we go if? I remember, frankly, some of the early automobiles. I remember the aircraft that we flew across the Pacific in with almost dead reckoning navigation in there. So it's always interesting. It isn't either this or that, but it's how do we use both and fit it into a good system that basically can clear, but you got to define your objective first. But you got to fit the pieces together and say, this is the best way to satisfy that objective.
So another interesting question from someone in the audience who's a flight controller and aspires to become a flight director. What guidance would you give that person?
It was interesting. There were so few people there around, in the mission control business at that time. And it was Chris, myself, John Hadge, and Clinton Lenny was in the process of coming up. He was essentially moving into the Bermuda flight director thing. It was really an opportunity to say, hey, we sure got to do a heck of a lot better than we're doing right now. And to do this, we got to have leadership at multiple levels. And Chris was very strong in upward leadership, and what we had to do is get people in downward leadership. And it was really a great opportunity to grow, because we were basically inventing everything we were going to do, and we were inventing the organization to do it. I think the initial Mercury control was a pretty good guess, because we got most of the system stuff nailed down, except we basically were fawning on the flight surgeon. He was like next guy next to God in mission control. He had his own controller, he had his own console, he had the analog recorder there, but basically we basically had to make some changes. And it was interesting to watch this thing evolve and then test. And we talked about in the early Apollo, we found the problem. We had a massive bad decision associated with management of the communications. This is where, fortunately, Ed was available, and in basically 4 months from a scratch start, he had to find the people, build them, write the procedures, develop the displays, and become part of the total team. This is the most interesting business to work in and ever. I mean, it's hard to really describe what it is to be in this place, and you got a problem. And you're going to find all kinds of people giving you ideas for solutions to this thing. Fun place to work. Work in mission control. William, okay, we'll put you in there.
I would be honored. Well, I have to ask this question because your vests are iconic, and everyone associates them with mission control. And someone in the audience wants to know, do you have a favorite vest that Martha made for you?
The favorite vest, it's hard to say. It's sort of like it asks, what is your favorite airplane? Well, it's the last one I flew. Okay, so basically the favorite vest, I would say, is the Apollo 13 one, not Apollo 13, the final one, the red, white, and blue one.
Oh, from 17.
Because yes. That you have there, because it's a very strange, you take a look at that is a metallic fabric. And that was a bear to make. And if you weren't careful, you'd get splinters in your fingers from it. You never brushed it.
Well, for those who don't know, we're so honored that Gene and Martha have lent that to us. We actually have it on exhibit here at Space Center Houston, so you can see it in the Starship Gallery in the timeline case. and it is a favorite item for our visitors to view when they're here. That's absolutely fantastic. So I'm curious, are you going to be working on another book? Do you have another book in you?
You know, it's interesting. I had several people, Fidel over there would call up about once a week and say, when are you going to finish? He'd say, Dutch turns out one a month. Okay, I'm 2 years into this thing here. So it was fun, but it's the kind of thing that I think the real experience was doing it yourself. Before, when I did my first book, I was working to page count issues, deadlines running down the line. And this book here was basically my words all the time, my priorities all the time. And it was a incredible business to work through. As I say, we went through 14 revisions. Most of those were formatting, but you learn more about this business. It's sort of like learning a new job. In fact, I would not want to be one of the people who overlook all these production developments for the book. Oh, you were Sharon. There we go. Oh, it's interesting. I had a flight director for the book called Sharon Duckworth. Well, I thought this, I looked at the name and I said, I looked at the name and I said, that must be an English lady. So I visualized her as a school marm with a whole bunch of gray hair around her. Until I found out she's a beautiful young lady there. And Jessica right here is different. She was, as we were writing, she'd say, Mr. Kranz, you have all kinds of good leadership lessons buried in your book. You ought to highlight them and bring them out. And so she started doing that. So basically, they were pretty good coaches in getting this thing done. But the beauty was they forced me to use my own words and everything. Okay.
Well, Gene, I find it kind of hard to imagine anyone forcing you to do anything. But I think that's fantastic. Well, I think we have come to the end of our time. This has gone by so quickly, and I'm sorry for those of you I've not been able to list your questions. Literally, we have 4 questions that were submitted by people this evening. But I want to take a moment just again to thank Gene and really express our thanks for your providing this incredibly insightful discussion and humor, and also for being such an incredible inspiration to all of us. I know that this evening we're going to have an opportunity for a book signing. Gene has graciously agreed to do that. I just want to let you know he's going to sign his name. He's not going to do any dedications because we have a lot of people here this evening, and we will, in an orderly way, have everyone line up outside for that. But I want to say again, too, how Space Center Houston really does stand as a living testament to the dedications of individuals like you. And you've shaped the course of space history. I want to reiterate our unyielding commitment to nurturing the flame of curiosity and exploration in the hearts of young minds, a commitment to continue the legacy that Eugene have created and etched into the fabric of space exploration. So in the spirit of honoring the past and embracing the future, we look forward to seeing the dreams and aspirations of the next generation flourish, driven by the stories and examples of trailblazers like you. So everyone, please join me in thanking Gene Kranz for spending some time with us this evening.
Okay.
And again, thank you all for joining us here at Space Center Houston. A couple of reminders. Again, we will be escorting Gene out and assembling a table toward the front where you can have your book signed. We'll queue up. We'll have staff out there to help guide you. And I do want to close this evening with a reminder of something from the space program. Some of you may have seen in the news that Space Center Houston has authenticated our podium used by John F. Kennedy. And it is actually the one he stood at when he gave his moonshot speech. It has been fully restored and is now an exhibit in the Starship Gallery. So we also invite you to take a look at that this evening. Thank you again for joining us.